Continuing our discussion, political change includes all categories of change in the direction of open, participatory, and accountable politics. It is the change in realm of civil and political societies, and in the structure of relations among civil society, political society, and the state. Youth awareness and active participation during election process belongs to this type of change. The emergence of civil society groups as pressure groups during crises in Philippine politics, such as the impeachment trial of Chief Justice Corona, is also a concrete manifestation on how political change works. Cultural change refers to all alterations affecting new traits or trait complexes, to changes in a culture's content and structure. These changes are caused by several factors such as the physical environment, population, war and conquest, random events, and technology. Earthquakes, repeated flooding, severe droughts, and other interruptions in the physical environment drastically alter people's lifestyles. Disasters like these caused damages to properties and even brought havoc to human lives. Significantly frequent exposures to natural calamities developed among the people the sense of resiliency, new perspectives, and coping mechanisms in confronting the vicissitudes of nature. Population movements brought about by migration and transnational origins, whether due to dislocation, deterritorialization or urban explosion, as well as increase and decrease in population, caused by urbanization or war, also perpetuate change. The lack of job opportunities in the Philippines, and the increasing demand of cheap labor overseas, Filipinos are forced to leave their families, for better income abroad. This resulted to the proliferation, or transnational families, where parents are contracted to live and work in another country away from their loved ones. Change also occurs as a result of war or constant fighting for territorial sovereignty and even recognition of one's political determination or identity. Wars significantly reduce population size, provide conditions for war industry to flourish, and enable the victors to lord over conquered territories and have subjugated ones under its control. Random events, or acts of man can also lead to change. The oil price hike in the world market, for example, creates a domino effect in public services, not only in the transport sector, but even in the process of basic commodities and rates of utilities, such as electricity and water. Technology also serves as one of the causes of changes. The impact of science and technology on social institutions like family, school, church, and state is a major impetus for change. For example, the invention of computer and internet access generated software applications that ultimately build multi-million-dollar social networking sites such as the Facebook. For the last lesson in Chapter 1, let us discuss the essence of anthropology, political science, and sociology. The numerous changes and transformations in the social, political, and cultural aspects of individuals and societies, all over the world are best understood, using the disciplines of anthropology, political science, and sociology. Anthropology is the study of human beings and their ancestors. Historically, the discipline traces its roots to philosophy, world travel, and scholars who studied pre-literate people and evolutionary thoughts. Also, anthropology produces knowledge about what makes people different from one another, and what they all share in common. Anthropologists work within 4 fields of discipline. Physical anthropology focuses on humans as biological organism, tracing evolutionary development, and looking at biological variations. Cultural anthropology investigates the contrasting ways groups of humans think, feel, and behave. Biological anthropology, mostly archaeology, try to recover information about human cultures, usually from the past, by studying material samples, skeletal remains, and settlements. Linguistics studies the nature and nuances of languages and communication systems, by which cultures are maintained and passed on to succeeding generations.
Welcome to the MCAT Multimedia Series, and to MCAT's Introduction to Anthropology. Anthropology is the study of people and their cultures. Its roots stretch back more than 1,000 years, to exotic travelers' tales imagining strange societies and peoples whose behavior fascinated early explorers. But scholars began this serious study of human culture only late in the 19th century. Early anthropologists studied customs and beliefs in pre-industrial societies in the hope of opening windows onto their own pasts, in order to explain how institutions like religion or the family had come to be. Some of the texts that emerged during this period continue to be influential. Among them, Marcel Mauss's book, The Gift, which argued that gifts, far from being free, create complex bonds of reciprocal obligation that help to underpin cultures. It was not until the early 20th century, though, that anthropology began to focus heavily on ethnography, the intensive long-term fieldwork that has become its best-known tool. Franz Boas in the United States and Bronislaw Malinowski in Britain rejected much of their predecessors' work as speculation and insisted on living among the people they studied and talking to them in their own languages. The questions asked by anthropology got more ambitious too. Rather than trying to understand how institutions developed over time, scholars began to ask how they fitted together to create a functioning society. This is the structural functionalist tradition, perhaps best exemplified by E. Evans Pritchard's Witchcraft, Oracles, and Magic, a book which demonstrated that belief in witchcraft made perfect sense when understood as a way of keeping order in society. Human culture is complex, and anthropology quickly developed into a number of specializations. Political anthropology questioned the assumptions of global politics, as when James Ferguson issued his challenge to the international development industry in The Anti-Politics Machine, and showed that aid is often directed to meet political goals rather than human needs. Medical anthropology explores differing experiences of medicine and disease. And Victor Turner, in The Ritual Process, explored the power of symbols through the performance of religious ceremonies. Feminist anthropology, too, has asked fundamental questions about the ways in which we understand society. Laila Abu-Lughod wonders why Western academics see the clothes worn by Muslim women as symbols of subjugation, rather than acceptance of a moral system, and why they expect Afghans to cast aside their burqas, when they themselves would never wear a pair of shorts to an opera. The 1960s saw further advances in anthropological theory, beginning with Claude Lévi-Strauss's ambitious attempts to study cultures as structures of human thought, His book, Structural Anthropology, drew on a model derived from linguistics to introduce what became known as structuralism, the theory that cultures are built on hidden underpinnings formed from human perceptions and activity, and the idea that all of these are constructs that are packed with meaning. A decade later, Clifford Geertz advanced another idea. His The Interpretation of Cultures suggested that cultures should not be studied scientifically and in search of laws, but interpretively, by scholars in search of meaning. This fresh thinking forced a re-examination of much ethnographic fieldwork, but it also liberated anthropology from a focus on the reproduction of culture that had made it blind to social change. Johannes Fabian's Time and the Other provides an example of anthropologists radically rethinking the ways in which they approach the people whom they study. Fabian pointed out how easy it was to fall into the trap of writing about people as if they inhabited not just another place, but another time. His work helped to inspire the development of historical anthropology, and texts like Eric Wolf's Europe and the People Without History, which gave voice to people whose stories had formerly been ignored. Today, anthropologists still seek new ways to reevaluate old problems and apply ethnographic methods to modern people in a rapidly changing and globalizing world. We'll introduce you to anthropologists past and present, and to the endlessly fascinating world of human culture. Come inside to find out more. MCAT. Learn better, think smarter, aim higher.
Political science is the body of knowledge relating to the study of the state and government. It primarily focuses on the power that plays a crucial part in the struggle, in which the individuals and their groups may be found involved, according to their capability and degree of interest at all levels, from local, regional, national, to international.
Political science is the systematic study of government and politics. It is a social science, just like sociology or psychology or anthropology, in that we are fascinated by human behavior. But in the case of political science, we look at political behavior in particular. Political science has often been defined as who gets what, when, where, and how. Political science is about power relationships. Why should one study political science? Political science is fascinating. It's about people. Politics impacts our lives directly and indirectly, whether we're aware of it or not. If there is a crime that takes place, one calls the police, that's government. If there's a fire that takes place, one calls the fire department, that's also government. The military is government as well. Our civil liberties, our rights, that impacts us on a daily basis. So if one happens to get pulled over by a police officer, for example, what are their legal rights in that kind of situation? The question of textbook costs and so on and so forth. These are actually fundamentally political decisions that are made by politicians, by elected officials. Political science is a very broad discipline. But some of the subdisciplines include national, state, and local government. So if one is taking political science courses in the United States, then they might take courses in American government, on the American presidency, the court system. There's international relations. That is a discipline where we look at how all of the various actors within the global system or the international system interact with one another. An international relations course, one might learn about topics such as human rights, such as globalization, such as international relations theories that help us understand the world around us, or at least attempt to explain various international phenomena. Power, military power, hard power, soft power. Another area that one might study within international relations would be foreign policy decision making. And in fact, one can take courses at most American college universities, and college universities indeed throughout the world, in studying the foreign policy of particular countries. Another subdiscipline within political science is political theory and or political philosophy. And in those courses, one would study some of the great thinkers throughout human history who have grappled with tough political philosophical questions about the nature of power, about the nature of human beings. and also really get into discussing various ideas and many of the isms, socialism, communism, Islamism, feminism, and so on. Another subdiscipline of political science is comparative government and politics. In comparative politics courses, we discuss and analyze the various political systems around the world. And there are two major approaches to the study of comparative politics. The first is the thematic approach, where one would study the various broad themes that would help us understand the various political systems around the world, such as revolutions or nationalism, things of that nature. Another approach is a country-by-country approach, where one studies the various countries around the world and their political systems and domestic politics and domestic political issues within a particular country. So within comparative politics, one can focus on the various regions of the world. So for example, Middle East, North African politics, or Latin American politics, or Asian and or African politics, or European politics. Another subdiscipline in the area of political science would be research methodology or quantitative analyses courses. And that's actually sort of the science part of political science, where one would utilize numbers to understand, explain, and predict political behavior. There are many things that one can do with a political science major in terms of career options. One could work for government at the federal, state, or local levels. One could work for the United Nations or other international governmental organizations. One could work in the nonprofit sector for non-governmental or nonprofit organizations. Or one might actually become a senator or a president or an elected official. In addition, one could teach with a political science background. One could be a diplomat and work as a foreign service officer or work for the State Department. One could also work in business and or even in journalism, in the news media. A political science background really prepares one for a wide range of possible career options. I would say that one would want to study political science because it's fascinating. It's about people. It's about the story of people. Political science will help you better analyze current events. Anyone who's literate can read newspapers or articles online, but political science will give you that ability to analyze the current events that are going on. It'll help you better formulate arguments and strengthen your arguments and develop your critical thinking skills. It's perhaps human nature to sort of look for easy answers and easy solutions and kind of get into black and white thinking. But what political science will do for someone is actually get you to understand that there are shades of gray and that there's nuance. And the world around us is not just black and white. And again, political science is a social science, so it's about people, and any social scientist finds the study of people fascinating. If you would like to learn more about your legal rights, if you would like to learn more about the Constitution, the United States Constitution that impacts you every day, then political science might be for you.
Sociology, on the other hand, is considered the science of society and social behavior, which is viewed as an aggregate of individuals. It deals with social development in general, describes and analyzes social life in all its phases and complexities through all ages. The science of the origin and development, structure, and functions of social groups, their forms, laws, customs, constitutions, modes of life, thought and action of their contribution to human culture and civilization, seeks to discover the general principles underlying all social phenomena and social relationship and to establish laws of chance and growth in social changes.
Hello, I'm Nicole Sweeney and I have a question for you. Have you ever wondered how the world works? I'm not talking about atoms and molecules or wave functions and chemical reactions. I mean the world of people. For example, have you ever wondered who goes to college and why? What is it that makes people march in the streets? How do you know to raise your hand in math class but not at the dinner table? Why do some people like Broadway musicals and some people like hip hop and some people like both? Well, we're gonna find out about all of that stuff and so much more. Especially you. You're gonna learn about you and your place in the world because this is Crash Course Sociology. Sociology got its start thanks to a French philosopher named Auguste Comte in the 1800s. He wanted there to be a systematic science for studying society, a way to investigate and solve its basic problems. And while sociology today is very different from what Comte imagined, that's still kind of what it is. Sociology is the scientific study of society and human behavior. But isn't society this great big thing? I mean, society is whole cities, it's the economy, it's politics, and what does all of that have to do with raising your hand at the dinner table? A lot, as it turns out. A society is just a group of people who share a culture and a territory, and culture is in everything, from the biggest questions in politics to the smallest interactions between people. So yes, society is big, but it's also very small. Want to see how? Let's go to the thought bubble. Imagine you're sitting alone in your room singing along to your favorite Broadway show at the top of your lungs. Not another person in sight. Society isn't anywhere to be found. Except that it is. Even if you ignore the house that you're in and the parents, siblings, or roommates you're probably bothering while you're singing so horribly, there's still the song that you're singing and the music that goes with it. Those things, along with literally every object in the room that you didn't make yourself, are all products of society. And you might be all alone when you're belting out Hamilton, but you weren't alone when a friend first introduced you to the musical and its songs. And for that matter, your taste in music isn't purely yours either. What kind of music you like can be influenced by anything from what you were exposed to as a kid, to what your friends like now, to what neighborhood you grew up in, or what schools you went to. Society is tricky. It gets in places you might not expect. Thanks, Thought Bubble. So when we say that sociology is the study of society and human behavior, that means that sociology is incredibly broad. In fact, it may be the broadest of what we call the social sciences. The social sciences include disciplines like economics and psychology, and while they all have different focuses and perspectives, they're all trying to understand the social world objectively through controlled and repeated observation. So what makes sociology different from any of these other social sciences? Well, like the others, sociology is looking for patterns, recurring characteristics or events, but it looks for all kinds of patterns in all kinds of places. Sociology looks at all aspects of society and at all scales, from two people talking to differences between nations. It's this scope that really sets sociology apart, especially in what's known as the sociological perspective. And the sociological perspective means two things. One, it means seeing the general in the particular, and two, it means seeing the strange in the familiar. Seeing the general in the particular is a way of saying that sociology tries to understand social behavior by placing it in its wider social context. To go back to you belting out Broadway tunes in your room, the sociologist who overhears you from the sidewalk might notice not just your choice of what to sing, but how that individual choice may have been influenced by your class, neighborhood, race, gender, or age. To take another example, a sociologist might not care whether or not you in particular decide to get married, but she might be interested in learning more about a declining marriage rate in your society and say what's causing it and whether it's having any societal impacts. Or maybe she's more interested in the fact that in the US, people tend to marry partners of the same class and race as them. In both of these cases, what people sing or whom they marry, the sociologist is interested in a general pattern, a pattern composed of a massive number of particular individual choices. Each individual forms a part of the pattern, and in looking at their individual choices, a sociologist can see elements of the whole pattern, like seeing how a single stone fits into a mosaic. Seeing the strange in the familiar is the second part of the sociological perspective, and it's maybe more difficult to do. To see the strange in the familiar is to approach the everyday world as though you were seeing it for the first time, as if you were from another world. This is hard, but it's also incredibly important, and kind of cool. When we asked at the very beginning why you raised your hand to ask a question in your math class, but not at your dinner table, that's a very small example of trying to see the strange in the familiar. And this is so hard to do because your own society tends to look normal to you. You take it for granted. As you're socialized into it, you're taught a common sense understanding of society, and that's not a bad thing. After all, you need a common sense understanding of society in order to live in it, right? You need to know that you shake hands when you meet someone new, and that red means stop, and that you should try to show up on time to things. But if sociology is going to study society, it needs to be able to look at these things as strange and unfamiliar in order to really understand how they work and to uncover patterns of behavior in a culture. Common sense has to just get us through the world. But sociology has to know what's true. And this is important because a society's common sense doesn't consist only of harmless conventions like shaking hands. Just 200 years ago in the US, it was common sense that only white men were capable of participating in society. It was common sense that slavery was right and that women shouldn't be allowed to vote. These things were common sense in the same way that their opposites are taken for granted now. And the sociological perspective, seeing the general and the particular and the strange and the familiar, helps us to understand problems like this because it helps us see some of the key concepts in the study of of society. Among these concepts, social location, marginalization, and power and inequality. If you imagine a map of society laying out all the different social groups and their relationships to each other, then your social location is your spot on that map. Your social location is a way of classifying yourself by race, social class, gender, sexual orientation, religion, etc. Understanding social location is important because just like the sociologist looks for the general and the particular, a person's life and choices will be influenced by their social location. This is true in a bunch of ways. Most obvious is that your social location can limit your choices. Some groups have legal rights and privileges that others don't. For instance, until a few years ago, gays and lesbians couldn't legally marry in the US, so their social location limited their choices. But social location also impacts what you learn and what you're taught about society. Whether or not you go to college, for instance, can be heavily influenced by whether the social class you grew up in tends to see college as a real or valuable possibility. And social location also affects what others have learned and are taught about you. Take, for instance, the consistent finding that resumes with names that sound African American tend to get called for interviews much less often than those with white-sounding names, even though the resumes are otherwise identical. In all these ways, social location can contribute to the marginalization of a social group. If a social group is marginalized, it means that it occupies a position outside the centers of power. Marginalized groups are often racial, ethnic, sexual, or religious minorities, and marginalized groups tend to have a clearer view of how power operates. Heterosexual people, for example, often don't recognize what a social power it is to have their relationships socially sanctioned, and to be able to display affection in public in ways that LGBT people often can't. If marginalization is a matter of being outside the centers of power, that draws our attention to another fact. The fact that there are many different kinds of power and many different kinds of inequality. There are, of course, the obvious kinds, like economic power and income inequality, or political power and politically enforced inequalities, like segregation or slavery. But then there are the less obvious kinds, like social or cultural power and inequality. For instance, people who speak with non-standard accents or dialects are often judged harshly for them, and can be seen as less intelligent or less mature. Sociology can help us identify and understand all of these things, and maybe even try and fix them. And that's the point. Sociology is all about understanding society, and society is where we all live, so we'd like it to work as well as possible. Good sociology can help us to create good public policy. And if we think back to Comte, his desire was to do just this, to understand and maybe fix his society's problems. The late 18th and 19th centuries were a time of massive economic, social, and political upheaval in Europe. This was when industrialization really took off, with factories sprouting up like weeds connected by larger and larger rail networks. At the same time, the population of Europe exploded, growing faster than at any time in previous history. This was especially true in cities where industrial production was centralized. And all of these massive economic and social changes came with political shocks too. This period saw the advent of mass democracy, the fall of kings, and the rise of the nation-state. This, combined with the rise of science as a discipline, was the context in which sociology arose. The first sociologists looked around at their quickly changing societies and were driven to try and scientifically understand them. We said earlier that society wasn't just big things like revolutions, industrialization, demographics, but it is also these things. It's both the big and the small because they're related. Sociology is about understanding the whole thing at every level and how those levels interact. It's about understanding why you don't have to raise your hand at the dinner table and why so-called common sense can lead to massive policy mistakes. Welcome to the science of sociology. Today we talked about what sociology is and what it does. We discussed what it means to be the study of society and why that's broader than you might think. We introduced the sociological perspective and discussed how sociology differentiates itself from the other social sciences. And finally, we discussed what sociology can do and how that concern with social problems was at the center of sociology's beginnings. Next time, we'll introduce different theories of society, the basic paradigms of sociology. Crash Course Sociology is filmed in the Dr. Cheryl C. Kinney studio in Missoula, Montana, and it's made with the help of all of these nice people. Our animation team is Thought Cafe, and Crash Course is made with Adobe Creative Cloud. If you'd like to keep Crash Course free for everyone forever, you can support the series at Patreon, a crowdfunding platform that allows you to support the content you love. Speaking of Patreon, we'd like to thank all of our patrons in general, and we'd like to specifically thank our Headmaster of Learning, David Sachowski. Thank you for your support.
The essence of anthropology, political science, and sociology. Thus, in the study of culture, society, and politics, it is important that the student should be equipped with the basic concepts of each discipline tackled. In the case of the Philippines, the ethnic origin of an individual, which is central in the study of anthropology, formed the basis in the granting of Filipino citizenship. Similarly, the political analysis of various political parties in the country, is more or less, cannot be detached from their relationship to social classes, a subject of inquiry among the sociologists. Therefore, the sociology of the electorate solves the difficulties emerging from the basic democratic mechanism. Chapter Recap 1. Culture is learned, shared, and symbolic. 2. Culture, society, and politics are essentials in understanding human behavior and social groups. 3. Social norms are guides or models of behavior which tells individuals what is proper or improper, appropriate or inappropriate, right or wrong. 4. Deviancy exists in absence of conformity, which can be formal or informal. 5. Deviants include food taboos, crime, and even the emergence of political dynasties. 6. Invention, discovery, and diffusion trigger social change. 7. Cultural change is caused by several factors, including the presence of technology. 8. The disciplines of anthropology, political science, and sociology are important in comprehending the dynamics of culture, society, and politics. Checking your understanding. On a clean sheet of paper, answer the following questions, as briefly as possible, in 5 to 10 sentences. Take a clear picture of it, and email it to me at cj_guizano@yahoo.com.ph on the specified date indicated in this video. 1. Why do you need to know others? 2. Why do labeling of people is based according to their differences? 3. What are some of the driving forces of culture change in the world today? 4. In your opinion, how do anthropology, political science, and sociology help in your understanding of society, culture, and politics? 5. How did this present pandemic of COVID-19 change the world?
In conclusion, culture is a concept that has been defined in many ways. Culture is timed, shared, and symbolic. And lastly, culture, society, and politics are the essentials in understanding human behavior and social groups. That's all for today, and I will see you in our next videos.